and get started. So again, thank you all for coming to our webinar covering sport nutrition. I'm sure that you are going to really enjoy hearing from our two speakers and learn a lot from them. Between the two of them, they have done pretty much every single track and field event and done it at a high level. So I think you know that you can trust their advice and know that they understand what you're experiencing as an athlete. And I think that this webinar is going to give you a lot to think about in terms of how to use nutrition as a tool in your toolkit to improve your performance, stay healthy, and enjoy what you do. So we're fortunate to be joined by Nicole Farnsworth, a registered dietitian certified specialist in sports dietetics. She received her bachelor's degree from Harvard University, where she competed for the track and field team in the heptathlon and pentathlon. She earned her master's in human nutrition at Columbia and then completed her dietetic internship at the NIH Clinical Center. She's a board certified sports dietitian and clinical nutrition specialist with the Female Athlete Program in the Division of Sports Medicine at Boston Children's Hospital. And then she also works as a sports dietitian at the private practice, Laura Moretti Nutrition, and serves as a consulting sports dietitian for Wheaton College. And we're also fortunate to be joined by Sarah Adler. She completed her master's degree in clinical nutrition at Boston University's Sargent College, and then her dietetic internship at Leahy Hospital Medical Center. Her passion for helping athletes to fuel properly began in her time as a multi-sport collegiate athlete, where she participated in field hockey, track and field, and cross country. She continues to train and compete in middle distance races, including the 800 and mile. She works with athletes of all ages to promote peak performance in sports, strength gains, and injury prevention through proper nutrition. In addition to working for Laura Moretti's private practice, she is the performance dietitian for the Sports Performance Center at UCLA Health, powered by Exos. So again, I think you're going to learn a lot from our speakers. And Nicole and Sarah, feel free to take it away.
Thank you, Amanda. Such a great introduction. I so appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our sports nutrition webinar, Fueling for Optimal Health and Performance on and off the track and field. Sarah and I are thrilled to be here today and have been looking forward to this presentation for some time. So without further ado, we'll take it away. So just a few flashback photos of us, and as Amanda did such a great job with our bios, I really have nothing to add other than we are thrilled to be here. We both specialize in working with athletes, and really that comes from our own background as athletes, and specifically track and field athletes. And we're thrilled to be able to talk to you a little bit more about fueling your bodies, about honoring your health and wellness, and I'll let Sarah do her own little introduction as well.
Yeah, thanks for having us. As Nicole said, we're both so excited to be here. I mean, my two favorite things, track and field or running in general, and nutrition. So very excited to get going. All right, so what is on the menu for tonight? We are going to give a little nutrition overview of why nutrition matters, especially for the track athlete or your average runner, and then touching on the power of nutrition. So when it comes to athletic performance, or if I have some younger runners on here, academic performance, injury recovery, injury prevention, we'll dive into a little bit of that. And then we'll go into the macronutrients. We'll get a deeper understanding of the components of our athlete's plate. And then that leads to our next topic. So building that performance plate, where we will run through some examples. And then diving into energy availability. So Nicole will talk through what happens when we're expending more energy than we're consuming. And then we'll touch on vitamins and minerals and the micronutrients for overall health and performance, especially the ones specific to runners, and tied into that some safe supplementation for sport and how to properly hydrate after that. And then we'll wrap up with like a mock day of race fueling. Oops, sorry, Nicole. And then we'll take questions. So feel free to jot down questions as they come up. You can put them in the chat, and I'm sure, time permitting at the end, we'll get to some of those good ones.
I was so excited. I just jumped ahead on you, Sarah. My apologies.
Oh, no, thank you. All right.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. So let's begin. Is nutrition really important for the track athlete, and does it make a difference? Naturally, I'm a little bit biased, but I'm going to say yes. So if you have any sort of performance goal, whether it's chasing a PR or trying to get faster, stronger, then nutrition matters. So my favorite motto as a track athlete is fueled is faster, or fueled is stronger. That's another good one. So just making sure we're fueling appropriately for sport. And then, of course, those energy needs are going to be higher for your track athlete or your runner, no matter what the event, because you are expending a lot of energy. And then, for my younger athletes, once again, you're in a period of growth on top of all the energy being expended at practice, meets, and runs. So it's not just those athletic goals like I touched on earlier, it's the academic goals, performing well in school. So for underfueled, it may be more difficult to focus and concentrate in the classroom. And then lastly, we want everyone in this sport to feel good and have fun. I know I always felt my best on the track and in races when my nutrition was right, because my body was fueled and ready for competition. So let's dive into that growth piece, especially for my younger athletes that I touched on in the last slide. If you look at that graph on the left, you'll see the red line is females and the blue line is males in regards to building bone mineral density, or a predictive measure for bone fractures. So something we're trying to avoid in sport, stress fractures, want to stay away from those. So we're building those strong bones, and we're building it up to 90% peak mass at age 18 in girls and around 20 in boys. So it's really important that we're fueling appropriately. And then, as we continue to age, we may see that bone mineral density level off and then even decline as we get older, which is why it's so crucial that we build up those strong bones with good nutrition early on. So when we look at our track athletes specifically, we see even more reason to fuel appropriately for our needs. So why is that? The high metabolic demand for this sport. So even on rest days, you're burning through that energy pretty rapidly. And then it's important to note with track and field, the nature of the sport is incredibly diverse. So we have to utilize different energy systems, aerobic and anaerobic, and aerobic being the one that your body produces energy in the presence of oxygen. And then anaerobic is how your body produces energy with very little oxygen available. So your body receives that oxygen, it uses it to produce energy and power your muscles to keep going in sport. So anaerobic running happens on those hard runs. Those are the ones where you're going harder or longer than your body can handle on that particular day, which I'm sure a lot of my runners here are familiar with. And when we run anaerobically, our breath feels more challenging to access maybe. We create that oxygen debt. So to make it sport specific, like my distance runners, they require a strong aerobic base that's built over time with consistent mileage and longer runs. And then my sprinters, they need that quick turnover, rapid energy burst, using the fast twitch muscles that fatigue pretty quickly. So, mid-distance athlete like myself, you're kind of having a blend of both here. So later in the presentation, we can discuss how to tailor and time our nutrition to meet the fueling demands of each energy system and then recover appropriately.
All right. So next, we're going to go into our next section on the macronutrients, the big three that we really want to focus on when it comes to nutrition. So we do have a few questions throughout the presentation. If you're logged into this webinar using Zoom, you can feel free to use the chat, whether it's to ask questions or to answer some that we've thrown into the presentation. So I guess the question I have for the audience is, can you name the three macronutrients? You can feel free to enter it into the chat. I'll give you a few moments to think on it, but then we'll go ahead and jump ahead to the next slide. All right. So the three macronutrients are carbohydrates, proteins, and fat. And we're going to go through them in that order. And this section of the presentation is really to teach you about what their value is in the body, what they do for us, and then translate that to why they matter for sport and for track, regardless of what your event is. So our first macronutrient are carbohydrates, arguably my favorite macronutrient. These are the fastest and most readily available energy source we have in our bodies. So every cell in our body runs off of glucose, which is broken down carbohydrate. Every carbohydrate, whether you're having oatmeal or Sour Patch Kids, will break down to glucose in some way, shape, or form. And if you're thinking about the analogy of your body being a car, that glucose is like your gasoline. So it's going to help your body run. And really, there's a few systems I want you to focus in on when it comes to growing athletes. One thing to keep in mind is glucose is the exclusive fuel for our brain. Only in times of dire need will we use any other fuel source. So when we're thinking about fueling our brains for being a student athlete, whether it's focused on the track or in the field or in the classroom, we want to prevent brain fog. So carbohydrates are critical for that. It's also going to fuel those muscles. And an added benefit is it protects muscles from being used for fuel. And we call that the protein sparing effect. So what that means is when we are having ample carbohydrates in our dietary intake, our body is using that for energy and for performance. If carbohydrates are too low, our body has to use a different form of fuel. And often it'll break down the protein in muscle to use that for fuel, which is very counterintuitive and against what we want with track athletes and all athletes. We want speed and power very often. So we want to keep that muscle integrity. So an added reason to make sure to have ample carbohydrates beyond the energy it gives is it actually helps enhance our strength and power. And a few of our favorite examples that Sarah and I added in here are pasta, fruit, bread, and oatmeal. So one of our favorite sayings in our group practice in general is eat pasta, run fasta. And it's a great reminder and just a quick little motto when you're kind of thinking about what do we need to focus in on when it comes to sport and performance. And especially for track athletes, and the longer the distances, the more this matters, those carbohydrates are really providing that essential fuel. So we like to divide carbohydrates into two separate categories. Some may call these complex and simple carbohydrates. The way we like to think about them are slow digesting and fast digesting. So slow digesting carbohydrates or slow carbs include fiber and protein. And the fiber and protein slows down the absorption of carbohydrates into the body, which means that the rise in blood sugar from having carbohydrates or blood glucose is slow and steady. We really try to emphasize including these at meals, and they help with sustainable energy. Generally, the recommendation is try to make 50% of your grains whole, or in this case, 50% of your carbohydrates, the slow variety. That does mean you can certainly have the fast digesting ones too, but trying to get that nice mix. And examples that we've include multigrain pasta, brown rice, whole grain breads and pastas, beans, oatmeal, quinoa, and these examples are, definitely ones we'd want you to include throughout your day. Then we also have the fast digesting carbohydrates. Unlike slow digesting, these contain little to no protein or fiber, which means they're absorbed really quickly into the blood. And so that blood glucose will spike up. And that's actually a great thing for immediate energy, which makes it super valuable to have around activity. They're typically used or stored in the body. And again, we like to get a nice mix of slow and fast carbohydrates. Examples of these would include white rice, energy bars, and pretzels, and they're great to use right before or in some cases during activity. And a few of our favorite examples include honey, Gatorade, and energy gels. So A question for all of you to be thinking about is, between slow and fast carbohydrates, which ones do you think you should have an hour before your race? I'll take a moment to see if anyone in the chat has any thoughts. And if you're thinking the answer is fast carbohydrates, you would be correct. So we want that quick energy, and we'll go into that more with nutrient timing. But yeah, if you're thinking about that very soon before race time, we're thinking fast carbohydrates there. All right, our next macronutrient is protein. So protein has many uses in the body. When we're thinking about it from sports performance, most of us think about the fact that it helps with muscle. It helps us build and repair our muscle tissue. All protein is made up of smaller amino acids, and beyond being building blocks of the muscle tissue, it helps to build protein in our body, which has a multitude of functions. Another benefit of protein is it adds fullness and satiety at our meals, and especially with busy athletes, you want to make sure you're having meals that are going to leave you full and satiated. And the needs of protein vary based on sport, and in some cases based on event. So some speed power athletes may have higher protein needs than maybe more endurance-based athletes. But in general, if you're looking for any specificity on that, it's a good idea to meet with a sports dietitian to talk through your personal energy needs. Some of the examples we like to include here can be animal-based or plant-based, chicken, beef, egg, legumes, or beans, and dairy. So just to highlight a little bit on dairy, dairy is an excellent source of vitamin D and calcium, and really supports in that important bone growth that Sarah was talking about earlier, and brain development. We generally recommend to aim to have 2 to 3 cups per day to help get that calcium and vitamin D into your dietary intake. It's also a great source of protein, so we like to highlight it here. And just a little bit on protein timing. So protein can be absorbed in varying amounts, but it does max out absorption. Now, the reason why it's important to talk about that is that protein is best absorbed when it's spread out generally throughout the day. So I highlight these examples on the left and right here to say that we really want to make sure that every athlete is getting protein at their meals, isn't skipping any meals, and is really taking advantage of that protein absorption. Spreading out the protein, absorbing more throughout the day helps with generally maximizing the benefits of protein for muscle growth and development. And this is just a reference table for all of you of some of the protein content of commonly encountered foods. So I just want to highlight a few things. So if you're looking at the palm of your hand, for example, so right about here, that's about 3.5 ounces. So chicken breast, salmon, beef, any animal protein of that size is going to be equate to about 25 grams of protein, which is a fairly solid start, like a really great protein serving for a meal for most. The other ones I like to highlight and make note of is if there are any cottage cheese fans in this webinar, it has a whopping 31 grams of protein in 1 cup. So if you like your cottage cheese, you're getting plenty of protein in it. And for those who drink almond milk, I just want to highlight that it is not naturally a great source of protein. So while cow's milk will have 8 grams of protein, same with soy milk, most almond milks only contain 1 gram of protein. So if you're ever looking for your beverage to have protein content in it, and you drink almond milk or you're non-dairy for any reason, I highly suggest looking for a higher protein almond milk, a pea milk such as Ripple, or a soy milk. All right, last macronutrient here, and then we're going to build our plate. So the last macronutrient to discuss here are dietary fats. These are the body's secondary fuel source, and it's a slow energy source. So while we're accessing carbohydrates during times of higher intensity, we're actually accessing fat for energy at lower, slower intensities for our training. These also have this added benefit of helping you stay full and satisfied longer. So similar to protein, they add that fullness and satiety. And we really want to include them at meals for that reason. The other reason we want to include them in our meals is they aid in absorption of fat-soluble vitamins. So when you have a meal and you add a fat source, whether that be avocado or salad dressing, olive oil, you're actually going to absorb more nutrition from that meal because of the inclusion of fat. They also support immune health and hormone production in the body and fight inflammation, which is important all the time, but especially critical when healing from injury. And with fat, as with all foods, we really like to encourage variety. So getting plenty of different sources, and a few of the ones that we highlight on this slide include olive oil, avocado, nuts, flax seeds, and fatty fish for those omega-3s, including salmon and tuna.
All right, thanks, Nicole. So now that we have all the components of our plate, well, maybe not all, we'll touch on a couple others, but we can take a look now at building that performance plate and put together some plates together. Next slide, please. Sorry. Okay, so how many of you have seen these athletes' plates before? And I'm asking a question and I can't see your answers, so I imagine quite a few of you. These are our medium and our hard training plates. The one on the left in gray is our medium, and then on the right, you see that red one, and that's our harder training day. So if you notice, the biggest difference between the two is the portion size of the grains. So that's our pastas, our rice, our potatoes, our cereals, our bread, our legumes. And then, we notice that the protein source kind of stays the same. We want to make sure we're getting enough protein, like Nicole said, spaced throughout the day appropriately, but also a good portion with all of our meals. So I do like to highlight, going back to the grains piece, that more often than not, my track athletes are going to be closer to that hard training plate day, because carbs are going to be your best friend for energy, like Nicole said, our favorite food group. So I think just kind of building a plate in this way, kind of focusing more so on that harder training plate, obviously tailoring it to your training, your hunger levels, your preferences, and protein sources being ones that Nicole mentioned, but poultry, beef, fish, eggs, dairy, and then your plant-based proteins like tofu and tempeh, and then some legumes and nuts, also providing some protein. So this slide is just a list of fruits, veggies, grains, protein, and fats to build your own plate based on performance and the foods you enjoy. If you're ever bored, want to put together a little paper plate, kind of put things in different groups and build a meal, this is a good place to search for options. So we're trying to make our meals delicious and enjoyable, not just fueling for sport, because your food should be delicious and enjoyable too. Bonus points if you actually pull pieces from each column and map out a plate and then actually cook it. I would say that's even better. But an example of what this might look like is an omelet with peppers, mushrooms, cheese, and then toast with some butter on there for your fats and a side of fruit. And then we've hit every single group. Another example might be for lunch, if you have peanut butter and jelly sandwich with a banana, a glass of milk, and a side of baby carrots, then we've also checked off each column. So you can kind of build your plate in a different way here. But this is actually one of my favorite slides, because naturally, no one's plate is portioned out into these little quadrants. It's just not realistic. So sometimes your performance plate looks like a burrito. So the big thing here is still making sure all of the components we talked about are there, our grain, our protein, our fat, and our color. So to break it down, our grains are coming from the tortilla and the rice, and then our complete protein source coming from chicken here. But there's also a good amount of plant-based protein in here from the beans paired with the rice to make that a complete protein, meaning it has a complete amino acid profile. And then we're getting our fats as well from the guacamole in there and the dressing potentially. And then some sauteed veggies for color, taste, and texture. A little bit of fiber as well. So in case you're not a burrito person, not sure who isn't, but in case you're not, here's a Mediterranean bowl, Kava edition. If you haven't tried Kava, it's delicious. So when we're building that bowl, we have our carbs coming from rice in the base there. I also recommend ordering pita on the side as another carb source. And then our complete protein, again, coming from chicken, but it can be anything. You could add salmon on top, you could add steak, you could add something else there for protein. And then again, a plant-based protein in there as well, coming from the hummus, source of fat with the dips like tzatziki might have a little bit of fat in there, dressings, and once again, our veggies for taste, texture, and fiber. So based on that, kind of putting everything together, it is important to remember that all foods can fit when we are building these plates and fueling our bodies. I believe there is a common misconception that there's good and bad foods out there, when in reality, our health is a combination of your diet as a whole. It's kind of the collective measure rather than each individual snack or meal. So there's no need to cut out any food group unless you do have an actual allergy or food intolerance. And then instead of focusing on labeling foods good or bad, we can focus on a well-rounded diet that's balanced and timed appropriately, which is the perfect segue actually into nutrient timing.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, perfect segue. All right. So with nutrient timing, we're really thinking about what we're eating and when and how that translates to our practices and competitions. So why do we think timing is important for nutrition? I'll give a few moments for the chat. But I think there's a number of reasons we can think of as to why, at least two. One is performance optimization. So fueling your body to make sure you have enough. And the other one is avoiding GI distress or stomach cramps. And so we really do want to, that can help with the performance optimization as well as just helping us feel well. So I'll hand the baton off to Sarah to tell you a little bit more about all of that.
Yes, thanks, Nicole. So for pre-activity nutrient timing, we are thinking carbs, carbs, carbs. So if we look at this image on this slide, we see a blend of carbs, protein, and fat when we are 4 hours out from exercise. So all the way on the left over there. As we move closer to what would be practice or a run or race time, we are moving towards solely carbohydrates for energy. So 2 hours before at that midpoint line, we see most of your snack or meal that you're having prior to exercise is made up of carbs. Very little protein and fat there. So maybe that's something like toast with a little bit of peanut butter and jam and honey, just so that sits well in the stomach before exercise. And then if we look at that 1 hour mark right before exercise, it's strictly carbs at that point. So, that's our rice cake with jelly, that's our Gatorade, that's our banana, our granola bar, and then of course, sips of water there, small amounts of water to stay hydrated. And then if we think post-exercise nutrition or recovery nutrition, we are looking to accomplish the 3 R's. So that is refueling, repairing, and replenishing. I always like to think of it as it is a whole collective recovery process, but I would say refuel with carbs, repair with protein, and replenish with hydration or fluids. But again, it's a combination of all 3 things. And then we do recommend optimizing recovery to kickstart that muscle tissue repair process that Nicole touched on when talking about protein. So that'll help us avoid that soreness that we may feel after exercise, even injury prevention, and just getting stronger in general. So this might mean trying to have something in that training window, 30 to 45 minutes after training, sorry. So optimizing the window afterwards. So what does that look like? What should you have? We like to say carbohydrates to protein in a 4-to-1 ratio. So good examples of that would be chocolate milk and a banana. Fairlife is one of my favorites. If you've ever had Fairlife chocolate milk, it is the best. And then milk and graham crackers, another good one, staying within that 4-to-1 ratio there. And then, if you can have a full meal within that time frame, absolutely go for it. Have a good balance of protein, carbs, fat, something like grilled chicken, veggies, a baked potato. If that sounds boring to you, go for the kava bowl, go for the burrito, just making sure we're having a good balance of carbs and protein there. So keeping with the same messaging here, right? So pre-workout, mainly carbs, post-workout, carbs and protein together. So before training or exercise, this might be a granola bar. We're thinking the more carb heavy ones like a Cliff Bar or Nature Valley bar, yogurt with fruit, peanut butter toast and a banana. You can even add some honey on there for some extra carbs. Pretzels, applesauce, like the go-go squeeze are pretty easy to pack and take with you. Dry cereal, oatmeal, sports drinks being a great carb source too, and graham crackers. And then post-workout, examples of pairing the two, chocolate milk and fruit, maybe banana and peanut butter or banana and almond butter, fruit and yogurt, or a smoothie. It's like one of my favorite post-workout snacks. Graham crackers with peanut butter, almond butter, yogurt with granola, a turkey sandwich. If you're not that hungry after, have half within that window, have some more later, or a whole one, or a complete meal like we talked about. But it is important to try to experiment with different foods, see what kind of makes you feel your best when you're training and competing.
All right, thanks, Sarah. So our next section is energy availability. And this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. Both Sarah and I, as sports dietitians, specialize in treating athletes with low energy availability. So we're going to talk to you a little bit about what that is and why energy availability matters. So an analogy we love to use when we're talking about energy availability, in part because it's probably the most accessible example we have, is thinking about a smartphone on low power mode. So if any of you, like me, have been without your charger for too long, you've probably run into this situation where your smartphone is in low battery, you need to throw it into low power mode. And so what happens to our phones when we do that? Maybe the backlight dims. You might not get as many notifications. I've actually gotten it so low that really all I could do were make phone calls. No other app would work. So when we're thinking about what the smartphone is doing in low power mode, it is conserving the battery that it has by shutting off or putting to sleep certain applications or systems that it usually has running in the background. And that helps to conserve power until we can plug it back into charge. So our bodies have its own way of doing that. And that is where energy availability comes into play. Now, in its simplest terms, energy availability is the calories consumed subtracting training calories throughout the day. And that is the number that is left over to fuel everything your body does in the background, so to speak. So everything your body does, whether it's cognitive function and muscle repair, breathing, temperature regulation, digestion, all of that takes so much energy, and we don't even need to think about it. It's pretty incredible when you kind of take a moment to step back. And so when that number is sufficient, that means our body systems, all systems go. Nothing needs to slow down. But if that number is too low, whether calories are too low or training calories expended are too high, then we're starting to run into our own version of low power mode. And the reason that this is such an important topic is it is not uncommon. The Female Athlete Program did a study a few years back in 1,000 female athletes and found out nearly half of them were identified as having low energy availability by a survey. So it is something that happens. It can be subtle or significant. And we're hoping today we can tell you more about the signs and symptoms so that if you encounter it, you know that there are solutions and that nutrition can be a part of that solution. So these are just a few signs and symptoms of low energy availability, a few examples of how the body may adapt to not having enough nutrition. And I should say that every athlete presents differently in our clinics. So no athlete will present the same. And even if you don't have a symptom, but you suspect you're not eating enough, it is a great idea to come in, because sometimes the solution can be a simple tweak in your nutrition. So just to go through these, one we certainly see is excessive fatigue. This can present during practices or competitions. It can also present outside of those settings, such as in the classroom, or having trouble staying awake after school. We also see in blood work vitamin deficiencies and anemia, which is inadequate iron status. We can see muscle loss, recurring injury, illness, and infection because the immune system is affected by inadequate nutrition. We additionally see hormone irregularities and menstrual dysfunction, which can mean inadequate hormones in female athletes, also low testosterone in male athletes. So this can affect both genders. We additionally will see recurrent injuries such as stress fractures, and this is relating to that hormone interaction between inadequate nutrition and increased risk for injury from stress fractures. Trouble recovering or making strength and performance gains. So I see a number of athletes who come in and they're working really hard, but they just know they're not hitting the times that they're capable of. And sometimes it can be as simple as a tweak in how they're fueling. Irritability is certainly a sign we see. If anyone's ever been hangry, they understand what I mean by that. That is certainly a sign that the body might not be getting enough food. So another more subtle one we might see is difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep. And this is because inadequate nutrition can actually throw off our circadian rhythm. And if we're hungry, we're probably going to wake up in the middle of the night looking for food. So another one to kind of keep in mind. And the last one on the slide is poor concentration. So again, these are not meant to be all encompassing and everyone presents a little differently, but if you or one of your teammates are starting to show some of these signs and symptoms, it could be worth meeting with a sports dietitian or sports medicine physician to kind of take a look at things and see if low energy availability could be the cause of your signs and symptoms here. So the next thing I want to introduce is the relative energy deficiency in sport model. So this was developed published back in 2014 and updated in 2018. And this model is really meant to illustrate and depict how those different energy systems are affected by inadequate nutrition or low energy availability. So when we're thinking about low power mode, these are the apps, so to speak, that can be affected. So just to take a little trip down memory lane, in the 90s, I believe early 90s, female athlete triad was the model that was being used in the sports medicine world to describe inadequate nutrition and its interaction on bone health and menstrual function in female athletes. Now, again, 2014 is when relative energy deficiency in sport was introduced to the world, and that was meant to expand upon the female athlete triad model and demonstrate how the system effect is actually larger and more dynamic than was expected. And we also wanted a model that included male athletes. We certainly see male athletes that present with inadequate nutrition as well. So just to quickly go through these circles, you might notice that they reflect the signs and symptoms we saw in the previous slide. So we saw the menstrual function and bone health piece with the stress fractures. We can certainly see effects on the endocrine system and those hormones, on metabolism and the slowing of metabolism that can occur. Those blood lab values and nutrition deficiencies certainly will show up in the hematological category. We see many young athletes who have their growth and development slowed down as a result of inadequate nutrition. So it's certainly a category we see. You might notice that on the psychological circle that the arrow is bidirectional, and that is because inadequate nutrition can certainly affect our mental health, but mental health can also impact how we eat and what we eat and can lead to inadequate nutrition. So that kind of is to explain that there. And then cardiovascular function, absolutely gastrointestinal function and immune function are affected as well. Now, this model goes beyond talking about the health outcomes. We also have a model that details the potential performance effects. So this is the one that when we're thinking about the athlete and this translation into hard work and training into performance, this is why nutrition really matters. We want to decrease injury risk. We want to increase training response, and inadequate nutrition will end up doing the opposite. It can affect coordination, concentration. It can lead to different mental health states, including depression. We get decreased muscle strength, endurance, performance. So fueling the body is really so critical to performance. And we know that inadequate nutrition has the potential to have detrimental effects in that regard. So when it comes to low energy availability or relative energy deficiency in sport, the beginning of starting to determine what the solution is trying to figure out what the cause of that low energy availability is. Now, that can be due to a clinical eating disorder, disordered eating, or just not enough intake for an energy expenditure. And that reason can be very multifactorial. But really figuring out why an athlete isn't getting enough food for their training will help us figure out how we can treat it as this dietitian on someone's team. So just to add a little bit to that not enough energy intake for expenditure, that can be because of many reasons, maybe malabsorption, it could be a food allergy, it could just be lack of knowledge. And I think that determining even the reason beyond that can be very helpful for guiding education and helping an athlete to correct. So when it comes to the healthy athlete versus the underfueled athlete or the eating disordered athlete, I think something to highlight is that an athlete, the qualities that make an amazing athlete can also be distorted and formed into qualities that can fuel a eating disorder or an underfueled individual. So there are subtle differences between a commitment to training and exercise that's excessive, to mental toughness and to severe self-discipline. And to being coachable versus being over compliant. So I think the critical thing is to acknowledge that the athlete really, we want to look towards resources for supporting the healthy athlete, for supporting that strong athlete, that well-fueled athlete. And to be aware of the signs and symptoms that an athlete might be struggling with their relationship with food to help them get the support they need. Right. So how do we avoid low energy availability throughout the day? It's really about fueling, spreading out that intake throughout the day. And so these examples are hopefully ones that you can take and use and learn. And you might be doing them already, but you might notice that those days that have the stars below are those ones where you see meals and snacks and really this nice spread of eating throughout the day versus long gaps. And it's really about prioritizing that nutrition. I like to always tell my athletes, I imagine you wouldn't skip a meal or you wouldn't skip a practice. So why would we ever skip a meal or snack?
Awesome. So we're switching gears a little bit here. We're going to talk micronutrients for the track athlete specifically. So how to get vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, fiber through the diet. We're talking about adding color to your plate with fruits and veggies specifically. So ideally, we're shooting for 2 servings of fruit a day, whether that's 2 cups of fruit or 2 whole pieces of fruit. So, or a mix, right? That could be a cup of berries, a banana, an apple, kind of mixing the two, or a smoothie where we put it all in one. And there's a variety of ways that we can have these things, right? So whether it's in a smoothie, fresh, frozen, dried, doesn't matter. We just want to make sure we're getting that nutrition and adding those colors. And if you've ever heard someone say, eat the rainbow, this is what they're talking about choosing a variety of veggies for optimal health, because the different colors have different vitamin, mineral, antioxidant profiles. So we always recommend a food first approach to get our nutrition, but in some instances, supplements may be necessary where we are deficient somewhere. So for example, and Nicole touched on this a little bit, but an athlete that may have a malabsorptive condition or a food intolerance, maybe they're lacking somewhere in their diet. But if an athlete has a special diet, such as vegetarian or vegan, they also may be missing some of those specific micronutrients we talked about because the source of it is removed from the diet. So, a vegan athlete may require B12 supplementation, just not getting it through the diet. So to backtrack a little bit, what even is a supplement? It's an ingredient that's added with the intention of adding nutritional value. So it's very important to note, though, that they're not regulated by the FDA. So before you take any supplement, it's important to consult with a registered dietitian or your primary care physician or a pediatrician. And then if cleared by them, making sure to look for one of those logos shown on the screen, because those are going to ensure that it's third-party certified, meaning that the supplement is safe for sport. So protein powders are a supplement as well. We like to say whey is the way. That's the phrase we go by. So if you can tolerate whey protein, we say choose whey. There's some research underway as well about the benefits of casein, which is a slower release protein before bed to help repair muscle tissue overnight. But we're really looking at leucine content of 2 to 3 grams per serving of protein. And that leucine is what stimulates muscle protein synthesis or muscle growth, to put it simply. So research still out there, but then plant-based proteins are great as well if they're preferred. So it's just another option to have. So specific to my runners, calcium and vitamin D are, another supplement, not just the food products, but potentially we're supplementing with calcium and vitamin D. Important to get through the diet. And if low, it can be corrected with supplements, but these two together are promoting strong bone health, decreasing stress fracture risk, improving healing of bone injuries, and actually aiding in muscle contraction. So all really important things for my runners. And if we take a food first approach, calcium is found in dairy products. So that's milk, yogurt, cheese, calcium fortified beverages, dried peas and beans, fish with bones, even have a good amount of calcium in there, your dark green leafy vegetables as well. And then also calcium fortified juices and cereals. So you can see on here the recommended daily amounts. If you're under 18, we're aiming for 1,300 milligrams a day. So that's kind of like an obscure number. So what does that mean? What does that even look like in food? That would be about 3 8-ounce glasses of milk plus 1.5 ounces of cheese and like a half cup yogurt will get you about 1,300 milligrams, just so you have a good measure there. And as for vitamin D, this is one of our fat soluble vitamins. We're looking for 800 to 1,000 IU per day. And sunlight also provides vitamin D. So iron, another important one for runners. So who's at the greatest risk of being iron deficient? This is going to be our endurance athletes, females, vegetarians, vegans, and runners in general. One of those reasons is due to foot strike hemolysis, which is mainly diagnosed in your endurance athletes or the distance runners. And that occurs when people are repeatedly landing on their feet. And that force of their body weight when they're running can actually cause some red blood cells to rupture within the small blood vessels or your capillaries in the soles of your feet. So we need to make sure our iron is within range, especially in this sport. So as iron is a necessary component of hemoglobin, and that's what's transporting oxygen from your lungs to your muscles. So what is this range? For females, it's 18 milligrams. If you're 18 plus, males, 8 milligrams. And then it's actually, if you're younger, it's 15 milligrams for females, 14 to 18, 11 milligrams for males, 14 to 18. It's a little different. But how do you even know if you're deficient? Risk factors above combined with low energy, as Nicole discussed. So it's important to confirm with a blood test, from your doctor or physician, and then checking ferritin specifically. So iron recommendations. We want to make sure we're getting adequate iron in the diet, and there are two ways to do so. We have our heme iron and our non-heme iron. And our heme iron is from animal protein, and we'll walk through some examples in the next slide. And that has a higher absorption rate at 40%. And then our non-heme sources are our vegetarian sources, a lower absorption rate, so we're getting 10% of that. But another tip to make sure we're getting enough iron would be to use a cast iron skillet. And then we're pairing our veggie sources with vitamin C to increase the absorption of iron. So these are the two types, or examples of the two types I just talked about. On your left side in the red is going to be your heme or animal-based sources. So your steak, chicken, turkey, fish, pork, eggs, and tuna. And then in the green letters on the right there, that's going to be your plant-based sources. So beans, wheat germ, spinach, fortified products, tofu, tahini, and raisins will get you some iron. And then lastly, we can touch on some of the vitamins and minerals that play a role in building better bones, which we're really hammering home today and talked about earlier. So calcium, vitamin D, magnesium, phosphorus, and zinc are all important to include. Generally, if we're eating a pretty varied diet, we're going to be getting a good amount of these. So calcium, we have dairy, soy, leafy greens, vitamin D, the fortified foods, sunlight, like we mentioned, mushrooms, and fatty fish. Magnesium coming from more of your plant-based sources, whole grains, leafy greens, nuts, quinoa, avocado, and then dairy. And then phosphorus coming from dairy, meat, poultry, fish, nuts, seeds, beans, your protein foods, and zinc as well, meat, shellfish, nuts, seeds, and legumes. So if we can kind of add a little bit of these into our diet here and there, and we're eating enough and appropriately and varied, then we're going to be getting a good amount of these.
All right. Our last big section, hydration. So a big thing to keep in mind. Yes, Sarah's got her water. I've got mine here. So the big thing with hydration, and the simple ways we like to think about it, are stay on top of your thirst. So if you're thirsty, probably means you need to hydrate, and try to drink half a cup to a cup of water every 15 minutes or 20 minutes as possible during training. If you want to be getting more individualized, plans can be created based on sweat levels, heat, age, and intensity. Hydration the urine color chart. So when we're looking at hydration, one of the quick ways to check in on it is to look at the color of urine in the toilet when you go to the bathroom. We're aiming for numbers 1, 2, and 3 on that chart, generally during the day. You might see a darker color first thing in the morning because you haven't been drinking overnight, but that light color usually indicates that you are hydrating your body and that we are at an adequate status. Just a quick note, we don't want to see clear urine. That means you might be overhydrating, and that is a thing. So trying to keep it in that light yellow category. We focus on dehydration because it can decrease performance and focus. It can lead to more stress on our cardiovascular system. It can create gastrointestinal or digestive distress. And it can really affect the way the blood flows to our muscles. And if we're reducing that blood flow to muscles, we're reducing oxygen, which can mean fatigue. So really critical to help with our performance is to stay on top of our fluids. And really the big thing that we learn as sports dietitians is that losing a lot of our body water through sweat can lead to this. So when we lose up to 2% of the body weight due to sweat loss, we're in a state of dehydration. And that is when we start to see in many athletes some of these concerns that present that I discussed just a moment ago. All right. So Again, suggested guidelines, if we were to get into more detail, a few hours before exercise, you might want a little more fluid. We're looking at more like 2 to 3 cups. 20 to 30 minutes prior, another cup to cup and a quarter. And again, individual needs may be based on sweat rate, age, and heat. So if you are in warmer weather, your hydration needs are likely going to increase. I think one thing that becomes sneaky is actually in colder weather, it's harder to know how much you're sweating. So you might need to stay on top of hydration even without noticing sweat loss. So extreme temperatures can lead to higher fluid loss. And a quick slide on electrolytes and sports drinks. So sports drinks can be really helpful for replacing electrolytes, sodium, chloride, and potassium. This is critical because when we're talking about fluid balance in the body, we're talking about water and electrolytes. And it's critical to have ample amounts of both and adequate amounts of both. And we lose electrolytes through our body during exercise, through sweat. Sports drinks really are necessary when activity is longer, so greater than an hour to an hour and a half, and in those extreme conditions, usually extreme heat or extreme cool. They have this added benefit of having carbohydrates. I'm sure anyone that's had a Gatorade or a Powerade can speak to the carbohydrate content and that nice sweetness in that flavor. That can be really beneficial. That can be those fast carbohydrates that we're using before or during activity to help maintain energy. And just again, on thinking about like these electrolytes, like these Noon tablets on the slide, that sodium, chloride, potassium, magnesium, and calcium is lost in sweat. So we want to replace those throughout exercise to aid in muscle contraction and prevent cramps. If you're a salty sweater, so if you sweat and you have like a salty residue on your skin or clothing, it means that you probably need to be replacing electrolytes even a little more avidly. And a few of our favorite brands include Noon, Drip Drop, The Right Stuff, Scratch Labs, and Gatorade as well.
Right. So now to bring everything that we talked about today together, we will touch on race day fueling. So I don't know about you guys, but my favorite part of training in track and field is race day when you see it all come together. So all the hours of running, training, lifting to reach that PR, same thing with the nutrition piece. You've hopefully spent a good amount of time fueling your body to reach those PRs and hit your goals in sport. So let's say your race is tomorrow and it's the night before your race or event. Hydration prep starts the day before. So we are trying to drink a good amount of fluids like Nicole just touched on that night before, not even just day of or right before exercise. And then we're also looking for a carb dominant dinner, so that's going to be your hard training plate that we walk through. Half of your plate at least being carbs, grains, think pasta parties with teammates if you've ever been to those. And then actually on race day, we are keeping that focus on carbs. We're going to load up those glycogen stores so we have that fast and readily available energy source. And important to note, let's stick with some food that that your body is used to. We love trying new foods, but nothing new on race day. And then of course, hydrating as always, sipping on fluids all day leading up to start time, ideally not chugging right before go time. And then about 45 to 60 minutes before your event, we have that goal of 45 to 60 grams of carbs. So we're topping off the tank before racing. But what does 45 to 60 grams of carbs mean? That's why we included that photo on the side. There's a couple of snacks there with the grams of carbohydrates listed. So for example, if you have your Cliff Bar there with an apple, that's going to give you about 61 grams of carbs, which is ideal to top off the tank before exercise. And then continuing with that race day plan, we're going to continue sipping and alternating between Powerade and Gatorade or some water between races and events. That's going to give you those quick carbs that Nicole was talking about as well as electrolytes. And then planning ahead and packing snacks. Bring those quick carbs to the track with you. Ideally having a quick carb 45 to 60 grams like we just talked about, what that looks like every hour. Banana, fruit, fruit snacks rather, like gummies or quick carbs as well. And then your body will tell you what it needs. So it's better to sip and eat small bites than have your tank run out or go into that low battery mode, especially not on race day. And then lastly, we're thinking about post-race recovery. So either that snack or meal that we gave examples of here, maybe a Core Power shake and a banana, or your Fairlife chocolate milk and a banana, a sandwich with turkey, cheese, avocado, veggies. Just good examples for post-race recovery. And then lastly, we just want to send you off with some takeaway tips. So big thing here, listening to your body, and along with that, honoring your hunger and fullness cues. Focusing on a balanced diet so we get all components in, whether it's the macronutrients or the micronutrients. Avoiding cutting out food groups unless you do have an allergy or sensitivity or intolerance to it. And then a really, really important one is to never compare your fueling plan with a teammate's plan, because your energy needs are different from theirs. No matter what the training is, you guys have different needs. And then as always, look to the experts. So registered dietitians, specifically sports dietitians like Nicole and myself, for nutrition advice and guidance.
All right. And if you're looking for more information, we have a few websites that we wanted to include, because we know it's the Wild West out there when it comes to nutrition info, and that everyone has an opinion on it. So if you're looking for evidence-based recommendations and the science of nutrition, we highly recommend the Academy of Nutrition Dietetics, Team USA, the Gatorade Sports Science Institute, the Sports Cardiovascular and Wellness Nutrition Group. We have a healthy eating guide for teens in sport, and the American Heart Association. So that is all we have for you today. And I know we are at time, but we are happy to be here to answer questions. And again, thank you so much for having us here. And we hope that you all learned something that you can use to help you excel on the track and field.
All right, thank you so much for that presentation. I'm sure everyone in the audience was able to learn something that will help them do the best that they can in their sport while staying healthy and happy. If it is okay with you, we have some questions that were presented before the presentation. I think we've got 8 of them in total. And anyone in the audience, if you have any questions on your mind right now, feel free to put them in the chat box. But if it works for you, we can just go through those questions.
Great. Sounds good.
All right. So our first question is on a trend. I don't think you mentioned it, but someone was wondering about your opinion and advice on practicing intermittent fasting as an athlete training for races.
Nicole, I will let you take this one.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah.
Nicole and I are non-diet dietitians, so I will let her go off on that.
Thank you. So to kind of, yes, give you a little bit of a background on our perspective, so that you can kind of help to understand our, the answer and what we see in the research. So we're non-diet dietitians. We generally believe that an athlete can have that all foods fit approach and doesn't need to follow any specific diet guideline or restrictions in order to excel and to have optimal health. Intermittent fasting has been pretty extensively studied in many populations, including the athlete one. And the research has generally not shown an improvement in performance. So that's probably the first and foremost piece of information. But I think the biggest thing, and why we also generally recommend against it, is it can be really interruptive to quality of life. So we work with a number of athletes who want to go out with their friends for breakfast or for ice cream in the evening, or, whatever it is. Having time restricted eating can really limit how an athlete eats, what an athlete eats, and who they eat with. And when we're thinking about our approach to food, we're wanting to emphasize that food is fuel and so much more. So food is social connection, it's tradition, it's meant to be enjoyed, as Sarah had said. And intermittent fasting, more often than not, can get in the way of that, in addition to it not necessarily having a benefit for performance.
Yeah. And to add on to that also, intermittent fasting, like typically people skip like the earlier part of the day and eat later at night, where I always like to point out, like, you are incredibly metabolically active when you wake up in the morning. You are coming off of hopefully at least 8 hours of sleep, but that is 8 hours without fuel, right? So technically breakfast, we're breaking that fast. Our metabolism is asking for some energy to get our day going. So it almost feels a little counterintuitive to push that back to later in the day. And then we're eating a little bit more later at night, where, you know, we might be trying to get ready for bed, that those circadian rhythms are going to be affected if we're kind of shifting our day of eating all the way over. So just another extra note there.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much for adding that. And I think those are some great perspectives as to why this particular fueling plan does not make sense for athletes and does not make sense for track and fields athletes. So we have two questions that I'm going to pair together. I think they both have to do with longer runs, longer races. But the first one, I think you touched on this a little bit already, is recommendations for before, during, and after a long run. And then also specifically carb choices prior to a marathon.
Great. Sarah, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, sure. So this was my little spiel on nutrient timing. So pre-long run, we're thinking those quick carbs. We want something that is easy on the belly, easily digested, not going to sit too heavy in our stomach on a longer run. So those were some of the simple carbs that Nicole talked about. And then anything over 60 minutes with training, we want to think about how can we kind of add in carbs, whether that's our Gatorade we're sipping on at that 60-minute mark. My distance runners, my marathoners, we're talking goos and gels. And you can work with a sports dietitian on how to specifically time those for you. Because, you know, there's the general guidelines and then there's the specific needs for you. And then afterwards, still kind of pairing those carbs and protein, that 4-to-1 ratio to make sure we're refilling those glycogen stores. We're making sure that our muscles are recovering, and also just for injury prevention purposes as well.
All right, great. Thank you. So our next question is on strategies to help teen girls, endurance runners maintain or gain weight to avoid amenorrhea, inconsistent performance, and other health issues.
Good question.
Great question. I love it. I mean, it really comes down to that. I mean, using the athlete's plate as a starting point, making sure that as an athlete, you're getting all of those food groups on your plate, that you're eating consistently throughout the day. So most athletes are going to eat 3 meals and probably, you know, easily 3 snacks, if not more, throughout their day, especially considering pre and post snacking. And I think a big thing to check in on is hunger and fullness. Are you eating when you're hungry? Are you eating until full? Some athletes sometimes only eat until their absence of hunger or neutral. Really getting in all of the food groups on the plate, like Sarah described. And I think if there's any doubts about it, maybe there's been concern raised at a pediatrician's appointment or any sort of risk factors of low energy availability, I always recommend, it does not hurt to meet with a sports dietitian. At the very least, it can provide peace of mind. And beyond that, it can provide some tips and recommendations to make sure those growing, developing female athletes are optimizing their nutrition so that they're growing and developing appropriately.
All right, great. Thank you. So we have 2 questions I'm going to pair together. Both have to do with a vegetarian diet, but one is, what suggestions do you have for a vegetarian that appears to have digestive issues with milk and dairy, but loves cheese and ice cream? So that's one. And then the other is, can you discuss if being a vegetarian female athlete affects the menstrual cycle?
Nicole, do you want me to take the first half of that one?
Sure, yeah.
So vegetarian athlete who potentially may be lactose intolerant, you know, there are the lactate pills, there are the non-dairy options, but making sure that we're still getting enough protein in the diet outside of that. So those are our plant-based sources, like our soy-based ones are tofu and tempeh, our nuts, our seeds, and there's, you know, the non-animal based sources of protein are like ever growing. So making sure we're getting adequate amounts there, right? And then also meeting with a sports dietitian or checking in on any deficiencies. So like B12 plays a big role in energy production, and my vegetarian athletes kind of sometimes that may dip a little bit lower when we're not eating animal products. So supplementation with B12, and then getting iron labs to make sure ferritin is within range, as well as vitamin D.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then when we're thinking about the plant-based adolescent athlete and, you know, the female athlete and menstrual function, I think one of the risk factors that can be a concern when we're thinking about energy availability is plant-based diets are really high in fiber because there's this emphasis on the plant foods, and that fiber can be very filling. So it does put an athlete at risk if they're not following the diet in an informed way, or they're putting forth a more veggie heavy meal. They may not get enough calories, enough energy from those carbohydrates, the protein and the fat in that meal, which can lead to potentially low energy availability and disruption of the menstrual cycle. So when we're looking at the plant-based female athlete, we're really trying to make sure that even if they are following a vegetarian diet, we're trying to liberalize it as much as possible. So emphasizing those, if there are dairy products they can have, absolutely encouraging that, encouraging eggs if they can, and then also making sure that that plate is, you know, reflective of their needs and that they're eating adequately throughout the day to support menstrual function among their other body function overall.
All right, thank you. So we did get some questions from the audience shortly after the presentation ended, and as you're answering those first questions. So if it's okay with you, we can go through these quickly. I also want to be as respectful as possible of your time. I think we've got 6 that came in from the audience, but most of them are on the quicker side. So what do you know about Pedialyte Sport as a pre or post workout drink?
Not too much. I actually am not super familiar with Pedialyte Sport, so I'm not sure if Sarah, you're familiar with it.
Mm-hmm. No, not specifically.
That's one that we could both take a look at, and you know, if there's an option to answer that at a future event, we would be happy to provide some more context. But without knowing the label and comparing it, I probably wouldn't be able to properly comment on it.
Okay. And then also kind of thinking about a sports-oriented product, is there a specific brand of gel or goo you recommend?
Oh, I have a whole list somewhere of all my goos and gels. You have to remember. I mean, Gatorade's Endurance line definitely has a gel. There's like the GU goo ones as well. Nicole, can you think of any others?
Those are my 2 go-tos personally. Those are my brands that I've used and that I tend to gravitate towards and recommend as well. I think the big thing with any of these fueling strategies, especially during running, is to practice. Try different brands on your long runs, try different flavors on your long runs, and get that variety of experience, because what might work for you might not work for your teammate. What might work on one long run might not work on the other. I remember at one point in marathon training, I was really liking the chocolate goos in the winter, and then the weather got warmer and I could not stand it. So I was really glad I was experimenting with some more fruity flavors. It made that transition a lot easier. So keep trying different brands, because what might work for you might vary. And I think that's probably why there's so many different products, successful products on the market. They're all generally using the same evidence-based guidelines in development and in research and development. And it's really coming down to, what do you think will work best for you?
All right, terrific advice. So our next question is from someone who's also a college track athlete at Northeastern. and before practice makes instant oatmeal and wondering, is this the best option or should I fuel differently before practice?
Well, first of all, go Huskies. It's really exciting that there's another Northeastern track athlete on here. So it's a great option to have instant oatmeal before. Is it the best? I wouldn't say there's any best, right? Because there's a ton of options out there. And as long as we're kind of following those pre-exercise guidelines of quick carbs like oatmeal, it could be toast, it could be freezer waffles, which is like my all-time favorite pre-run breakfast or snack. So I would say that's a great option. And if that works for you and sits well and there's no GI upset and you feel good training, you feel fueled training, then that's awesome. That's going to be a perfect option. But you can play around with it. If you get bored of it, try other some other carb heavy breakfast ideas before training.
Okay, sounds good. So we have 3 more questions left. We can just try and go through these as quickly as we can. So first one, this is very informative presentation. Thank you. If I want to lose fat while running a lot, should I focus more on eating less or eating very healthy like fruits?
So I think there's probably a few things that I want to bring forth with this question, and Sarah might want to jump in on it as well. I think when we're talking about adolescent athletes, we're really not discussing or focusing in on weight management. This is really a time to be focusing on skill acquisition, on development, on speed and power. And it's not a place to be focusing in on any sort of weight management, given the potential risks for low energy availability and how that can affect long-term health as well as growth and development. I think one of the big things, and this is probably, this is definitely not unique to the running community, but it's certainly a thing in the running community, is that focus on a certain body type or a certain expectation of appearance for certain track and field events. And I really like to emphasize, focusing on that balanced athlete's plate. So taking a look at energy output and fueling properly for it, and almost letting the body be the guide as far as like where it wants to be for ample performance. Now, Sarah might also, I'm not sure if you want to add to that or if you have thoughts on that as well, but would love to hear that.
I think that was spot on and very well put. I think you nailed it.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah, thank you for sharing those perspectives. So next question, someone's main sport is wrestling and wondering how a wrestling diet is different from a runner's diets.
That's a great question. This is actually a really nice question. A few of our team members from our group were actually at a combat sport conference this past weekend, including myself, and we learned a little bit about some of the nuances of a wrestling diet, and there are some differences. I think there are some definite, similarities, and I think the athlete's plate is a great starting point. But I think there are definitely some nuances to wrestling that we couldn't encompass in this presentation. I think the biggest thing when it's coming to fueling any athlete is following the athlete's plate as a guide. So if you're active and you're moving your body, you want to be at least that moderate plate that Sarah was describing with the athlete's plate. And once you're adding activity, you're expanding those carbohydrates. The same for wrestling as it would be for track and field. And then I think for specific details around wrestling and some of the kind of features of wrestling that differentiate for track and field, it could be helpful to meet with a sports dietitian to go over those. And especially when talking with a youth athlete, again, it's a lot of skill acquisition, but there are also probably some, wrestling culture and nutrition conversations that can be had as well.
All right, thank you. So last question, we really appreciate your patience in answering all of these individual questions. What is recommended prior to traveling 20 to 26 hours on a plane to a competition?
From a nutrition perspective, we could definitely address that. But from a performance perspective, if my coach put me on a plane day before a race, man, my legs are going to be tight. But no, all jokes aside, that's when we were talking about kind of that race day fueling, and we touched on, it's the night before race day. What are we looking at? We're talking about our team pasta parties. But, if you don't have access to be able to make that food because you're on a flight, it's being prepared. So packing some sort of balanced plate, I know that requires a bit of work, but if you can, I know pasta probably doesn't travel that well, but some sort of carb, whether it's some pita or bread, or you can even do rice, if whatever transports well, and then pair it with a protein, add your fats in there, and a grain, whether it's, some airports have a grain bowl that you could even get, which would be a good idea for that night before a race. But don't try anything new. Like we talked about, we want to stick with kind of what we're used to around competition to avoid any stomach issues. So yeah, that's what I would recommend. Carbs and packing snacks and packing a meal.
All right. Sounds like a good plan. So I think that covers the questions that had been submitted. Thank you again to both of our speakers. And like I said, I hope everyone learned something that they're able to take with them, enjoy their meals, and work towards being the best athlete they can be. And I did want to let everyone know that our presentation is recorded, and we will have a link up and posted, so that way you can view, share it with friends or teammates if you would like. And if you have any further questions, feel free to email me and I can reach out to our speakers.
Thank you so much. Amanda, if you want to pass along, or whoever's still on, for individual work, if you kind of want to work on performance or nutrition in sport, info@lauramorettird.com, and you can work with either Nicole or myself on a fueling plan, or we have some lovely other RDs on board.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having us. And yes, as Sarah said, we have a wonderful team of highly skilled and very specialized sports dietitians on our team, and we're located all over the country, seeing patients virtually, and look forward to working with any of you that would like guidance.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, and I know a lot of sports nutrition is individual, so we learned some awesome strategies today, but if you have very individual questions or concerns, this would be an awesome resource to get some of those answered.
Thank you.
Of course.
All right, so it seems like most everyone is signing off. Yeah, thank you all for tuning in. But yeah, I will stay in touch on getting the checks out to both of you. Thank you again for your time tonight, and especially staying on a little bit extra to get those questions answered. I'm sure the audience appreciated that. And then I'll also send out that email address you mentioned, because I do think the individual meetings would definitely help out a lot of athletes.
Totally.
Of course. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much for having us, Amanda. This was so fun as always. We love talking track and field with fellow track and field athletes.
Yes.
Oh yeah, no, I'm glad you enjoyed it, and I think it was perfect to have a perspective from other high-level athletes, just helping with the relatability and just knowing, these people understand our sport well.
Yeah. Thank you again. It was so much fun.
Thanks, everybody.